Your doctor is lying to you.
Your doctor is lying to you. Charles Vance looked up. A little girl was standing in the doorway of his private suite. She had 2 braids with yellow rubber bands, a backpack shaped like a turtle, and an expression so completely serious that for a moment he forgot she was 6 years old. "I'm sorry," he said. "Your doctor," she said again, slowly, like she was making sure he heard every word, "is lying to you." Charles stared at her. She stared back. She didn't look frightened. She didn't look uncertain. She looked like someone who had decided to say something important and was going to stand there until it landed. "Who are you?" he asked. "Annie," she said. "How did you get in here?" The door wasn't all the way closed. She pointed at the heavy oak door behind her, which was indeed resting open by about 2 inches. "I knocked, but you didn't hear me." Charles looked at this child. He looked at the door. He looked back at the child. "What exactly," he said carefully, "do you mean when you say my doctor's lying to me?" Annie stepped fully into the room. She let the door swing mostly shut behind her. She walked to the chair across from him and sat down like she had been invited. "I heard them," she said, "in the hallway. 2 of them, talking." And that is where the story begins. Charles Vance was dying. That's what they had told him. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3, 14 months, maybe 18 if the treatment held. He had received this information the way he received everything, without flinching, without drama, with the disciplined calm of a man who had built a $9 billion industrial empire on the principle that information, however unpleasant, was always better than ignorance. He had assembled a medical team he trusted completely. Dr. Elliot Marsh, 64 years old, silver-haired, the kind of doctor who had treated heads of state and Olympic athletes and spoke to his patients in the tone of someone who had seen everything and was no longer surprised by any of it. He led the team. Dr. Patricia Sundell, 57, 47 published papers on late-stage oncology, the one who reviewed the scans, the one who adjusted the protocol, the one who sat across from Charles on Monday mornings and walked him through the numbers with the unhurried precision of someone who had delivered bad news so many times she had developed a method for it. Dr. Raymond Cho, 49, named one of the top 10 cancer specialists in North America. Quiet, technical, the one who explained mechanisms and processes in enough detail that Charles felt informed. He had moved himself into the Hargrove Private Medical Center, a facility so exclusive it had no publicly listed phone number. His suite on the 14th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows and Italian leather chairs and fresh flowers delivered every morning. His assistant Gerald Fitch worked in the adjoining room during the day. The door to his suite was heavy oak. And 3 weeks into this arrangement, on a Thursday evening in late October, that door was not fully latched. Dorothy Osei had cleaned the 14th floor east corridor for 11 years. She was 63, dependable, invisible, in the way that hospital cleaning staff are invisible to most people who benefit from their work. She knew each room on her corridor, the way you know rooms you've cleaned hundreds of times. Their habits, their smells, their particular kinds of disorder. That Thursday, her neighbor had called at 5:45 to say she couldn't watch Annie. A daughter in labor. Terribly sorry. Dorothy had tried 3 other people, all unavailable. So Annie came with her. This had happened before. Annie knew the rules. Sit in the chair near the supply closet. Don't touch anything that isn't yours. Draw or read until Grandma is done. Annie was good at the rules. She was also good at listening. She sat in the folding chair by the supply closet and worked on her horse drawing. She had been trying to get the legs right for weeks, and they kept coming out like rectangles, which was wrong, and it bothered her. Her green crayon moved carefully across the page. 2 men came down the corridor. They stopped near the oak door at the end of the hall. Annie didn't look up. Men in white coats stopped in hospital corridors. That was normal, but something in the tone of the taller one's voice made her go still. He was trying to keep his voice down. She listened. "His numbers qualify him for the Meridox trial," the taller man said. The marker profile matches exactly. That trial takes 18 months minimum, said the second man. No guarantee. And if he dies in the trial, we lose the account. The whole Vance account. A pause. So we don't tell him, the taller man said. It was not a question. We don't tell him, the second confirmed. They walked away in the other direction. Annie sat very still. She was 6 years old. She didn't know what Meradox was. She didn't know what a marker profile was. But she knew what she had just heard, because it was simple, and simple things are hard to misunderstand. There was a sick man behind that door. There was something that might help him. And 2 people had just agreed not to tell him. She thought about what her grandmother said. When you know something is wrong and you say nothing, you become part of the wrong thing. Annie did not want to be part of the wrong thing. She looked down the corridor at the oak door. It was not fully closed. She knocked. No answer. She pushed the door open. She walked in. So that was how a 6-year-old girl from a 5th-floor apartment in the Bronx came to be sitting in a leather chair in the private suite of Charles Vance, Billionaire, looking at him with an expression that was approximately 7 times more serious than her face should have been capable of. Charles looked at her for a long moment. You heard 2 doctors, he said, in the hallway. Yes. And one of them said, what exactly? Annie straightened slightly, the way she did at school when a teacher asked her to repeat something she'd heard, and she wanted to get it exactly right. He said, his numbers qualify him for the Meradox trial. The marker profile matches exactly. And the other one said the trial takes a long time and there's no guarantee, and that if you die in the trial, they lose the account. He said the whole Vance account. Twice. She paused. Then the first one said, so we don't tell him. And the second one said, we don't tell him. Charles was very still. And then they walked away, he asked. In that direction. She pointed. Not this direction. They didn't see me. Charles looked at her. Annie, he said, do you know what Meradox is? No, she said. I just spelled how it sounded. Is that right? He looked at her for another long moment. It's exactly right, he said. He picked up his laptop from the table beside his chair. He typed the word. He read. He read again. The room was very quiet. Meradox was a compound in late-stage clinical trials, targeting a specific combination of genetic mutations in pancreatic cancer. The combination was called CRAS G12C and SMAD4. No. Dr. Sundell had explained both of those terms to Charles 5 months ago when the biopsy came back. His cancer had both markers. The response rate for patients with his profile, 61% measurable tumor reduction at 6 months. His current protocol's response rate, approximately 15%. He had known about his marker profile for 5 months. His doctors had known for longer. Not one of them had mentioned Meradox. He set the laptop down. He looked at Annie, who was sitting in a chair with her turtle backpack on her lap, waiting with the patience of a child who had learned how to wait. How long have you been at this hospital tonight? He asked. Since 7, she said. My grandma is cleaning the rooms. Does she know you're in here? No, Annie said, with the calmness of someone stating a fact rather than confessing one. Charles thought about this. You should go back to your chair before she finishes, he said. I'll speak with her later. Annie slid off the leather chair. She walked to the door. She stopped and turned around. Are you going to do something? She asked. About what I told you? Charles looked at her. Yes, he said. Annie nodded once, like this was the answer she had expected and had come in specifically to receive. Okay, she said. She walked out the door. Charles sat alone in the quiet room for a long time. He looked at the laptop. He looked at the words CRAS G12C and SMAD4. No on the screen. Words that had been spoken to him 5 months ago, and that now meant something different from what they had meant that morning. He thought about the 3 doctors who came and went through his oak door every day. He thought about how much he trusted them. He thought about how much he was paying them. He thought about the phrase the whole Vance account, and what it meant that a doctor had used those words in that sentence. He picked up the phone and called Gerald. I need you to do 3 things, he said. First, find out who was on the cleaning staff for this corridor tonight. Second, get me everything publicly available on something called a Meridox trial. Compound name, trial registration, efficacy data, everything. He paused. Third, find Dr. Simone Adachi's number. In Zurich. Gerald, who never asked unnecessary questions, said, "I'll have it all by morning." He did. The Meridox trial data was even clearer in full than it had looked in the search results. Gerald had pulled the peer-reviewed publications, the clinical trial registration, the cohort data from 3 independent sites. He had laid it out in a folder with a summary page at the front that presented the key figures in the plain language that Charles preferred. Response rate for Charles's marker profile, 61% at 6 months. Current protocol response rate, 15%. Trial open enrollment, 8 months ago. Charles's marker profile confirmed. 5 months ago. Trial still enrolling. Enrollment window, 6 more weeks. Charles read the summary page twice. Then he read the underlying papers. Then he called Zurich. Dr. Simone Adachi answered on the third ring. He was 58, Swiss-educated, Japanese-American, quiet and exact in his manner. He had briefly consulted on a health matter involving Charles's late wife 6 years earlier, a recommendation from someone Charles had trusted completely and never had reason to regret. "Charles," Dr. Adachi said, "it's been a long time. I need a second opinion," Charles said, "entirely confidential." "Of course." Charles laid it out, the diagnosis, the marker profile, the current protocol, the prognosis, and Meridox. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. "Charles," Dr. Adachi said carefully, "who assembled your treatment team?" Charles told him. Another silence. "And they have not mentioned the Meridox trial to you?" "No." Dr. Adachi exhaled slowly. "I want to choose my words with care, because I'm working from a phone call and not your full chart. But the Meridox trial for patients with your specific marker profile is the most significant development in this disease category in at least 6 years. The efficacy data is not preliminary. It's been replicated across 3 independent cohorts. The response rate for your profile is nearly 4 times standard of care." He paused. "Any oncologist treating a patient with your profile who has not discussed this trial with them is, at minimum, negligent, depending on the circumstances, potentially considerably worse." "The circumstances," Charles said, "involve a financial arrangement that creates a strong incentive to keep me on a long-term protocol rather than enter me into a trial." A very long pause. "Are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" Dr. Adachi said, "I am." "Charles." Another pause. "I could be in New York Tuesday." "I need you here for a meeting," Charles said. "Thursday." "I'll be there." Charles thanked him and ended the call. He looked out the window at the city. He thought about a 6-year-old girl sitting in a folding chair in a hospital hallway, drawing horses, listening. He thought about the courage it had taken to walk through that door. He thought about 4 words said directly to his face by someone who had nothing to gain from saying them and every reason to stay out of it. He picked up Gerald's legal pad and wrote at the top, "What else don't I know?" Gerald spent the weekend on the financial documents. He was the kind of person who read financial arrangements the way a doctor reads a chart. Not looking for a specific problem, but building a complete picture and noting anything that didn't sit right. He found several things. The monthly billing from the 3 doctors was large on its own, but there were additional revenue streams attached to the Vance account, facility fees, consultation charges, a diagnostic services contract that renewed automatically each quarter. That made the total monthly value of Charles's illness to the Hargrove Center considerably larger than any single invoice suggested. He also found that a secondary medication Charles was on, managing a cardiovascular condition unrelated to the cancer, had been maintained at a dosage that 2 recent clinical papers had identified as higher than current best practice recommendations for patients over 60 with Charles's profile. The medication was a brand-name drug with a per-unit cost approximately 4 times its generic equivalent, and the prescriptions ran through the Hargrove Center's in-house pharmacy. Not obviously wrong, standing alone, but standing next to everything else, noticeable. Gerald presented the summary on Monday morning, without editorializing. Charles read it through twice. How much of this is actionable? He asked. The Meridox omission, combined with the financial arrangement, likely constitutes a violation of informed consent obligations, Gerald said. The medication issue is harder to characterize without expert clinical review. He paused. Dr. Adachi will be better positioned to assess that dimension. He arrives Tuesday, Charles said. Prepare a briefing. Dr. Adachi arrived Tuesday afternoon and spent 3 hours with Charles. He reviewed every treatment decision made in the past 5 months. He cross-referenced protocols against current literature. He asked specific questions. He listened to the answers and wrote things down in a small notebook in a handwriting, so small it looked like print. At the end of it, he sat back and was quiet for a moment. The core oncology protocol, he said, is not malpractice in the strict technical sense. It is a legitimate approach. But for a patient with your specific profile, it is not the optimal approach, and the failure to discuss Meridox is, in my clinical judgment, indefensible. He paused. There is also a reasonable argument that the secondary medication management warrants investigation. I can document that dimension formally if you want to include it in the regulatory filing. Include it, Charles said. The Boston trial site. I spoke with the principal investigator yesterday, Dr. Yvette Bloom, based on your profile and current staging. She considers you an excellent candidate. She can schedule initial screening for next week. If screening clears, first treatment cycle begins within 14 days of that. Book the screening, Charles said. He paused. Thursday, he said. I want you at the table. I'll be there. The meeting was Thursday at 10. Gerald had sent a standard calendar invitation. Treatment consultation, Charles's suite, Thursday 10 a.m. No other details. The kind of invitation they had received and attended without question for 3 months. Dr. Marsh arrived first. Dr. Sundell 2 minutes later. Dr. Cho last. Dr. Cho stepped into the room, took in the arrangement. Charles at the head of the table, Gerald by the window, Dr. Adachi at Charles's right with a folder in front of him, and his expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, into something more careful. Good morning, Dr. Marsh said pleasantly. He looked at Dr. Adachi. I don't believe we've met. Dr. Simone Adachi, Charles said. He's been reviewing my case. A small recalibration in Dr. Marsh's expression. The look of a man who has just discovered that the conversation he prepared for is a different conversation from the one he's about to have. Always happy to consult with colleagues, Dr. Marsh said. They sat. Charles let a moment of silence go by. I'd like to talk about Meridox, he said. The room changed, not dramatically, subtle. But Charles had spent 40 years watching the faces of people who were managing information in real time, and he saw all 3 of them do something in a half-second after that word. Meridox is a trial compound, Dr. Marsh said, smooth and immediate, still in clinical testing. The data is promising but preliminary. The data shows a 61% response rate for my marker profile. Charles said. He opened the folder. Replicated across 3 independent cohorts, published in peer-reviewed journals. That is not preliminary. He turned the first document, so it faced Dr. Marsh. Dr. Marsh looked at it. There's a clinical trial site in Boston. Charles said, 90 minutes from here. I spoke with the principal investigator this week. I am an excellent candidate. The enrollment window closes in 6 weeks. He paused. You have known about my marker profile for 5 months. You have known about this trial for longer. You chose not to tell me about it. Dr. Marsh opened his mouth. Please don't tell me it was a clinical judgment. Charles said. He turned to the next section of the folder. Gerald had assembled it cleanly. The billing structure, the facility revenue streams, the prescription arrangement, laid out as a series of numbers and facts that didn't require interpretation. They told their own story. Dr. Cho looked at the table. Dr. Sundell's hands pressed flat against the surface in front of her. Dr. Marsh was very still. I heard a conversation, Charles said, in this hallway. Two of you, discussing why you weren't going to mention the Meridox trial to me. He looked at Dr. Marsh steadily. The words used were, if he dies in the trial, we lose the account, the whole Vance account. Dr. Marsh said, that is an unfair characterization of... Don't, Charles said. The word was not loud, but it landed the way words land when spoken by someone who has ended important conversations and made irreversible decisions for 40 years. And every person at the table felt the finality of it. Silence. I'm terminating my treatment relationship with all three of you, effective today, Charles said. Gerald has the documentation. I expect full cooperation in transferring my records to Dr. Adachi. He looked at each of them in turn. I am also filing formal complaints with the New York State Department of Health and the relevant medical licensing boards. Legal counsel will be in touch. He closed the folder. That's all. Dr. Marsh looked at him. Something moved across his face. Not contrition. Calculation. The assessment of a man trying to find a response that changes the outcome. There was no such response. Gerald opened the door. They left. When the door closed, Dr. Adachi exhaled quietly. Very precise, he said. I've had practice, Charles said. He sat for a moment. He looked at the window. Below, the park was full of late October color. Orange, red, yellow that was almost gold. He hadn't really looked at it in weeks. He looked at it now. The 3 o'clock call with Boston, he said. Are we still on? Still on, Dr. Adachi said. If this story is sitting with you right now, please hit the like button and share it with someone. We're not done yet. That Saturday, Annie came back. Dorothy had brought her at 11, and Annie walked in with her turtle backpack and her serious expression, and she stopped just inside the door and looked at Charles in that long, evaluating way. Then she crossed the room and sat in a chair by the window. She looked at the crackers on the table. She looked at Charles. You did something, she said. I did. Did it work? I'm starting a new treatment next week. Charles said, different team, different approach. The trial we talked about, I've been accepted. Annie took a cracker. She ate it and thought about this. Did they get in trouble? She asked. The doctors. They're in the process of facing consequences. Charles said, yes. Annie nodded, not with satisfaction. Just confirmation that the world was working correctly. Good, she said. Charles looked at her. Annie, he said, why did you come into my room that night? You could have stayed in your chair. No one would have known you heard anything. Annie looked at the window for a moment. My grandma says when you know something is wrong and you stay quiet, you're kind of part of the wrong thing. She paused. I didn't want to be part of it. You weren't afraid? Charles said. A little, she said, knocking on a stranger's door. But you did it anyway. My mom says being scared of something doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. She looked at him directly. And you look sick. Through the door. You were just sitting by the window. Charles was quiet for a moment. I want to do something for your family, he said. Something that helps. Tell me what would be most useful. Annie considered this carefully. My grandma's feet hurt, she said. Every morning she soaks them in warm water. Her shoes don't fit right, but she keeps wearing them because buying new ones. She stopped. She says it's not the right time, but it's been not the right time for 2 years. I'll get her properly fitted shoes, Charles said. Good ones. Okay, she thought. My school's reading corner has books that are falling apart. My teacher tapes the spines. But eventually they fall apart too much for tape. New books. A full reading corner. All of them. All of them. And some extras. Annie nodded slowly. Also, she said, my grandma has worked here for 11 years, and she hasn't had a raise. Charles looked at her. How do you know that? She talks to my aunt after I'm in bed. Annie said simply, she thinks I'm asleep. She says she doesn't ask because she doesn't want trouble. She looked at him. But she works very hard. I will speak with the facilities administration today, Charles said, about her compensation and about a formal review of the pay structure for all long-serving staff. Today? Annie said. Today. She seemed satisfied. She reached into her turtle backpack, took out her notebook, and opened it to a blank page. She took out her green crayon. She worked for several minutes, pressing carefully, her tongue at the corner of her lip the way it went when she was concentrating. She tore out the page and held it across to him. A man in a large chair, a window, buildings outside, and a small sun in the corner. The man in the chair had a straight line for a mouth, not quite a smile, not a frown. Somewhere honest. Under the drawing, in large green letters, "You will be okay." Charles looked at the drawing for a while. Something shifted quietly in his chest. "Thank you, Annie," he said. "You're welcome," she said. She zipped her backpack and stood up. She stopped at the door. She turned around. "The horses," she said. "The horses? I've been drawing horses," she said, "but the legs keep looking like rectangles. They're wrong and I can't fix it." Charles thought for a moment. "I have an art department," he said. "I'll find you the right book, with real instructions." "With pictures?" she said. "With pictures," he said. Annie gave one single nod of acceptance. She walked out the door. The next morning, Charles asked Gerald to arrange something he hadn't done in years. He wanted to visit Annie's school. Not officially, not with press or preparation, just a person going to school to see a reading corner. Gerald arranged it quietly. The school was a 5-story public building in the Bronx with a mural on the side wall. Children of various heights holding hands in a row, the paint faded but intact. The kind of school that had exactly the budget it needed to function, and not $1 more. The principal was a woman named Mrs. Okafor, 12 years running the school. She received Charles in her office with the careful precision of someone who has learned to be polite and accurate simultaneously when unexpected wealthy visitors appear. "The reading corner," Charles said. "I'd like to see it." She led him through a hallway that smelled like chalk and lunch and the warmth of many children, and into a classroom at the end of the second floor. The reading corner was in the back left, a half circle of low bookshelves, a cushioned bench built against the wall, 2 beanbag chairs on the floor. The carpet in front of the shelves was worn thin from small feet. There were perhaps 60 books on the shelves. Charles pulled one out. The spine was wrapped in clear packing tape, carefully applied. He turned to the copyright page. The book was 12 years old. He pulled out a second. 8 years. A third. 14. He looked at Mrs. Okafor. "What would it cost," he said, "to replace everything here with new copies and add twice as many titles? Focus on what the children actually want to read?" Mrs. Okafor looked at him steadily. "I have a list," she said. "I've kept it for 3 years. Send to Gerald by tomorrow," Charles said. He handed her the card. "The books should be here before the end of the month." Mrs. Okafor looked at the card, then at Charles. "May I ask," she said, "why this school?" "A student here," Charles said, "did something recently that required a kind of courage that most adults I know would not have managed." He looked at the reading corner. "This is a very small part of saying thank you." Mrs. Okafor was quiet. "Annie," she said. Charles looked at her. "She's been coming to this corner since kindergarten," Mrs. Okafor said. "She's read most of what's here twice." She paused. "She's also been drawing horses on every available surface since September." "The horses are improving," Charles said. Mrs. Okafor smiled. "I'll send the list tomorrow," she said. The board proceedings took several months. The New York State Department of Health opened a formal inquiry 6 weeks after Charles's filing. The legal team he had engaged was methodical and thorough. Dr. Marsh faced the most serious outcome, a censure and mandatory supervision period that effectively ended his ability to practice independently. Dr. Cho received a formal reprimand and required ethics training. Dr. Sundell, whose involvement in the specific decision was harder to establish directly, avoided formal sanction but not professional consequence. The inquiry traveled through narrow medical circles in the way such things do, and the reputational damage was lasting. Charles did not publicize any of it. He considered it. There were people who argued, Gerald mildly, Dr. Adachi more directly, that making it public would serve a purpose, warn other patients, send a signal. He thought about it carefully and decided that the regulatory process was the right vehicle. He was not interested in spectacle. He was interested in consequences, and the consequences were happening through the channels built for them. The first treatment cycle at the Boston trial site began on a Tuesday morning in November. Charles had driven up the night before and stayed in a hotel 2 blocks from the clinical center. He had not brought Gerald. He had brought Dr. Adachi, who sat with him through the intake process and the baseline measurements, and the long series of questions that the trial coordinators asked before the first infusion began. Dr. Yvette Bloom was the principal investigator. She was 44, direct, economical in her speech. The kind of person who explained exactly what was happening and what to expect and what the next steps were, without hedging and without false warmth. Charles found her immediately trustworthy for exactly those reasons. Your baseline numbers are strong for your staging, she told him before the infusion. That's a meaningful starting point. What does that mean for the expected outcome? Charles asked. It means we have something to work with, she said. I'm not going to tell you more than that, because I'd be telling you things I don't know yet. We'll have useful data at the 6-week assessment. That's exactly the right answer, Charles said. She looked at him. Most patients want reassurance, she said. I want accuracy, Charles said. She nodded once, with the expression of someone who had just been given information she found useful. The infusion took 4 hours. Charles sat in a reclining chair by a window that looked out at a parking structure, which was not a beautiful view, but was, in its own way, real, the ordinary, unadorned reality of a place where medicine was being done without spectacle or luxury or Italian leather chairs. He sat with it. He thought about his wife. She had died 8 years ago, from a different illness, with a different team, and he had never questioned anything they told him, because questioning felt at the time like a betrayal of the expertise he had entrusted her care to. He had sat in waiting rooms and nodded at briefings, and managed the business of her treatment the way he managed everything, with efficient delegation. She had died in 14 months from the first diagnosis. He had never asked afterward whether there was something he should have asked differently. He was asking it now. For the first time, sitting in a reclining chair across from a parking structure. He didn't know the answer. He probably never would. But asking the question felt like something he owed her, even now, 8 years later. He sat with that, too. Dr. Adachi came to check on him at the 2-hour mark. How are you? He asked. Thinking, Charles said. Dr. Adachi sat in the chair beside him. He didn't ask what Charles was thinking about. He sat there for about 10 minutes, reading something on his phone, and then said, the numbers from the pre-infusion blood work look clean. And Charles said, good. And they sat in a companionable quiet that Charles had not experienced in a very long time. It was, he thought, what it felt like to be cared for by someone who was actually paying attention. He came back to New York that evening and called Dorothy. She answered on the second ring. The first treatment went well, he said. I wanted to let you know. A pause. I'm glad, Dorothy said carefully. I also want to tell you something, Charles said, about the facility, about your compensation. He had spoken with Hargrove's director of operations the previous week, as promised. The conversation had been direct. Charles had made clear that he was aware of the pay structure for long-tenured cleaning staff, that he considered inadequate, and that he was in position to redirect the Vance account, which had been the facility's most valuable private patient account for the past 3 months, and which would continue to generate revenue through transition to outpatient treatment, to a different facility if the matter was not addressed appropriately. The director had, within 48 hours, initiated a formal compensation review for all cleaning staff with more than 5 years of service. Dorothy's retroactive adjustment, taking into account 11 years without meaningful increase, was significant. You'll receive a letter this week, Charles said, with the details. It will include a retroactive payment, Silence on the other end. "Mr. Vance," Dorothy said finally. "Charles," he said. Another pause. "Charles," she said. "You didn't need to." "She noticed," Charles said. "Annie, she noticed that you soak your feet every morning. She noticed you hadn't been paid what you'd earned. She noticed things I should have noticed about my own situation and didn't." He paused. "You raised someone extraordinary. That's worth something." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "She's been drawing horses nonstop," Dorothy said. "Since you sent that book. The kitchen table looks like a stable." "The legs?" Charles asked. "Getting better every day," Dorothy said. "She makes me look at each one and tell her what's improved." Charles smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that reached his face without effort, the kind he had not produced often in the past year. "Good," he said. "The 6-week assessment came back in December. Dr. Bloom called Charles directly with the results. She was, as always, direct and exact. The primary tumor had shown measurable reduction, not elimination. No one was using that word, but real documented, imaging-confirmed reduction. The rate of reduction placed in the category of patients the trial's designers had described as meaningful responders. Meaningful, Charles said. "In oncology, meaningful is a large word," Dr. Bloom said. Charles sat with that for a moment. "What does the next phase look like?" he asked. She told him. 3 more treatment cycles. Assessment after each one. Adjustment of protocol, as needed based on response data. No guarantees, but a clear path forward based on real information. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear," Charles said. He ended the call. He sat at his desk for a while. He picked up the drawing from the desk drawer. The man in the chair, the window, the small sun in the corner, the straight-line mouth that was honest rather than falsely happy. "You will be okay." He didn't know if it was true yet. Nobody did. But he was in the right conversation now. He was asking the right questions. He was being told accurate information by people who had no incentive to shade it. That was different from where he had been. That was because of 4 words said directly to his face by a child who had walked through an open door. He put the drawing back. He opened his computer. He wrote an email to Gerald with a single line. "I want to establish a patient advocacy fund for families who can't afford second opinions. Draft a framework." Gerald replied in 4 minutes. "Already outlined. Sending now." Annie came to see him one more time before the end of the year. Dorothy brought her on a Saturday afternoon in late December. The city was cold, and the windows of Charles's suite were fogged slightly at the edges from the contrast between the heated interior and the winter outside. Annie walked in and looked around. "There are more flowers than last time," she said. "I've been ordering more," Charles said. She considered this. "My grandma likes flowers," she said, "specifically yellow ones." "I'll note that," Charles said. She sat in her chair. She put her backpack on her lap. "How's the head?" Charles asked. Annie looked at him. "The horse head?" "Yes." She reached into her backpack and took out her notebook. She opened it to a page near the middle and turned it so Charles could see. A horse. Complete body, neck, legs that were lean and specific and correct, and a head that was recognizably, unmistakably, a horse's head. The ears placed right, the eye in the right position, the nose at the right angle. It was a good drawing, not professional, but genuinely good, the kind of drawing that shows real observation and real patience. "Annie," Charles said, "that's excellent." She looked at it critically, the way artists look at their own work. "The nostril is still a little wrong," she said. "It looks right to me." "You're not drawing it," she said. Charles almost laughed. She put the notebook away. She looked at the flowers on the windowsill. She looked at the park below, white and quiet. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Not cruelly, just directly." "Sometimes," Charles said. "About being sick?" "About uncertainty," he said. "I've spent most of my life making certain things happen. This is something I can't make certain." And he thought about this. "My grandma says uncertainty is just what it's called when you don't know yet," she said. She says it's not the same as bad. Charles sat with that for a moment. Your grandmother, he said, is a very consistent source of wisdom. I know, Annie said. She says I get it from her. Do you agree? Annie considered. Partially, she said seriously. Charles laughed. A real one. Full and unguarded. The kind he had almost forgotten he was capable of. Annie looked at him, slightly surprised, and then she smiled too, a small, real smile that was the first one he had seen from her, because she had always been so serious. It changed her face entirely. She looked like what she was, a 6-year-old child in December, sitting by a window with flowers on the sill and the park right below. Annie, Charles said when he had stopped laughing. What? Thank you, he said, for the original thing, for walking through that door. She thought about this. You would have figured it out, she said. Maybe, he said, eventually, but maybe not in time. He paused. You made it in time. Annie looked at the park. My mom is coming home in the spring, she said. It was a different subject. Or maybe it wasn't. She's been working in another city. But she's coming home. That's good news, Charles said. She doesn't know about any of this, Annie said. About the hospital. About you. My grandma said we'd tell her when she gets back. What do you think she'll say? Charles asked. Annie thought about it honestly. She'll say I shouldn't have gone into a stranger's room, Annie said. And then she'll say she's proud of me. She paused. That's what she usually does. That sounds like a very good mother, Charles said. She is, Annie said, simply and completely. She stood up and put on her backpack. At the door, she stopped. She didn't turn around this time. She just spoke toward the door. Work on the uncertainty thing, she said. My grandma says if you practice not knowing things, it gets easier. Charles looked at her small back, the turtle backpack, the yellow rubber bands on her braids. I'll practice, he said. She walked out. What he did publicize. 6 months later, when his first trial assessment came back strong and the framework for the Patient Advocacy Fund was ready for announcement, was something else. The press conference was in the Vance Industries headquarters building, overlooking the harbor. Mid-April, the harbor was bright. The trees in the small park across the street were in early leaf, that particular brief shade of green that only exists for about 2 weeks before it deepens into summer. Charles had not noticed things like that in a long time. He noticed it that morning and stood at the window for a few minutes looking at it before going in. The room was full. Business press, a handful of medical journalists, people who had heard things about his prognosis and were very quiet when he stepped to the podium. He was thinner than a year ago. His hair was shorter. He moved with a new care, but he walked to the podium without help and stood without holding it. He had prepared a statement. He had read it and then set it aside. He talked about the trial, about what the first assessment showed, not a cure, not a certainty, but a genuine and meaningful change in the direction of his case. He talked about informed consent and second opinions and the questions patients don't ask because they've surrendered the right to ask them. He talked about financial arrangements and the way incentives can quietly reshape the decisions made by people you've trusted completely. He talked about asking questions, even when the environment makes you feel like the questions aren't necessary, even when the experts around you are confident and expensive and credentialed. And then he held up a piece of paper. The room went quiet. It was a small piece of notebook paper, worn at the fold lines, soft from being opened and closed many times. The writing was in green crayon, large, careful, firmly pressed. Your doctor is lying to you. For words, Charles said to my face by a child who had no reason to get involved and every reason to stay in her chair. He paused. She heard something in the hallway that she wasn't supposed to hear. She could have told herself it wasn't her business. She could have said she was too young to understand. She walked into my room and said 4 words directly to me, and those 4 words gave me back my life. He set the note down. I don't know what my prognosis is anymore, he said. That's how medicine works when you're actually being treated. There are no guarantees. I'm in a trial. I'm responding. Things may change. He looked at the room. But I have a chance now that I did not have a year ago. Because a 6-year-old girl decided that staying quiet was not who she wanted to be. The room held its silence for a long moment. Then it filled. The book arrived at Annie's school the following week. Oversized, heavy, mat-covered. A horse in full gallop on the front, muscles defined. Every leg in exactly the right position. Inside, a systematic guide to drawing horses, developed by an equine artist who had also trained as a veterinary anatomist. Illustrations throughout. Explanations of structure, weight, movement. Practice exercises on every spread. The first exercise in the chapter on legs said, before you draw from observation, draw what you think you know, then look at the photograph. Find the difference. The difference is what you will learn. There was a card tucked in the front cover. For Annie, who understands that telling the truth is the right thing even when it costs you something. Work on those legs. You'll get them right. CV. The book arrived with a second package. Good quality drawing pencils, a large pad of drawing paper, and a note from Gerald saying that if Annie needed additional materials, she had only to ask. Annie's teacher found her in the reading corner at lunch. She was already sitting cross-legged with the book open across her lap and her notebook beside it and her green crayon in her hand, looking back and forth between the illustration and her own page, the way the book said to do it, finding the differences. "What's that?" her teacher asked. Annie looked up. "A present," she said. "Who gave it to you?" Annie looked back at her drawing. "Someone who needed help," she said simply, "and let me give it to him." Her teacher smiled and left her to it. Annie pressed her crayon to the paper. She drew the front left leg of her horse. She looked at the book. She looked at her page. She drew it again. This time, it didn't look like a rectangle. This time, it looked exactly right. 5 months after the press conference, a letter arrived at Vance Industries addressed to Charles personally. It was on notebook paper, spiral torn at one edge, in handwriting larger, and less even than the original 4 words, because this was longer and the writer had been less practiced with letters this many. Dear Mr. Vance, my grandma told me your checkup went good and the medicine is still working. I am glad. I finished a horse drawing book. The legs are right now. I am working on the head. I hope you keep feeling better. Your friend, Annie. P.S. The Reading Corner has new books. My favorite is about a horse named Flicka. I think you would like her. Charles read it twice. He folded it and put it in the desk drawer with the other notes. He had 4 pieces of paper in that drawer now. He thought that was a good number. He opened his computer and wrote to Gerald. Find the best children's horse books. A full collection. For a school reading corner. And for one child who is working on the head. Gerald replied in 6 minutes. He had already started a list. If this story touched something in you, please leave a comment below. Tell us what stayed with you, like the video. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that truth matters and courage doesn't have a minimum age. And if you've ever had someone in your life tell you a hard truth because they cared, say their name in the comments. They deserve to be remembered. The moral of this story, the most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth when you have nothing to gain from it. Annie was 6 years old. She had a folding chair and a notebook and a green crayon. She had no stake in what happened to the man behind the oak door. She could have drawn her horse and gone home and never thought about any of it again. But she had been raised by a woman who said that silence, in the face of something wrong, makes you part of the wrong thing. So she knocked on a stranger's door. She said 4 words directly to his face. And those 4 words changed the direction of his life. Charles Vance had $9 billion and 3 world-class specialists and every advantage that money could assemble. He had built an empire on information and analysis, and he had almost died, not from the disease, but from trusting the wrong people so completely that he had stopped asking questions. The thing that saved him was not power or money or leverage. It was a child who decided that telling the truth was worth the discomfort of walking through an open door. Ask your questions. Trust the people who have no reason to lie to you. And when someone tells you something is wrong, especially someone who has nothing to gain from saying it, listen. Really listen. Because sometimes the most important voice in a room is the one that nobody taught you to take seriously. This is a work of fiction. All characters, names, medical facilities, pharmaceutical names, and events in this story are entirely imaginary, created for entertainment and storytelling purposes only. Any resemblance to real individuals, real medical practices, real pharmaceutical products, or actual events is purely coincidental. Nothing in this story constitutes medical advice. Always consult qualified, licensed medical professionals regarding your personal healthcare decisions.